Welcome, Carla. I'm so excited to have you here today, and we are talking about NLP, which is super fascinating. Um, let's just dive right in. Carla, can you tell me who you are and how you first discovered NLP?
Who I am, that's a great question.
Yeah.
So I am an NLP trainer. I live in Seattle, work mostly in Northern California doing training. I got involved in NLP when I was I think my sophomore year in college. And um, I was doing what everybody else was doing. I was in therapy, and my roommate was in therapy, and my roommate had an NLP practitioner. I had a regular therapist. We would compare notes, and what I realized very quickly was that she was making progress much faster than I was. So I started seeing an NLP practitioner in the Seattle area who happened to be the person who would sponsor trainings to come up to Seattle. So I started working with that woman and then proceeded very quickly into trainings myself.
Okay, wow. And currently, what kind of people are you working with or like to work with?
I have a wide variety of people I work with. Of course, mostly adults, but I do have a few children. Usually those are children of parents I've worked with. But otherwise, it's mostly adults, and it's pretty much anybody who's wanting something different in their life than what they currently have. So anywhere from I just got through a breakup and I need some help to, I'm having trouble starting my business, or I'm wanting to be able to work out more regularly, or, it just goes all over the board.
Okay,
The
excellent.
favorite topics are always relationship and money, but that's just regular therapy
That was
talk.
that. Yeah, that sounds about normal. So, can you describe a little more what the learning journey was with you for NLP in the beginning?
Yeah, I took the initial course, which we now call core competencies. And in those days when we were doing trainings, the Seattle trainings, it would take 2 or 3 core classes in a row before we would have enough students to do a master's. So I took the core, and then I was a training assistant for 2 more rounds, and then went into the master track. Trained with through my initial training was through the NLP Center for Advanced Studies in San Francisco, the same place Carl Buchheit trained with.
Oh, okay.
Jonathan Rice being one of my main trainers. Um, but I had a variety of different trainers back in the early days.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
And can you give us, just so we have a brief, if we can call it a brief, a little history of like where NLP kind of came from?
Yeah, NLP was developed in the mid to late 70s down in Santa Cruz. A couple people who were trying to put together some sense of how what the difference was between the people that were really excellent at what they did and the people that were good but not excellent at what they did. They presuppose that nobody set out and woke up every morning saying, I'm just going to be a mediocre teacher or just a mediocre business person. But some people seem to have gifts that excelled them further, and they were able to do kind of miraculous things within their field. And so they started with the simple question, what's the difference that makes the difference? And began to start modeling out, and by modeling out, kind of figuring out exactly what the difference was between the people that were excellent at what they did and the people that were just okay at or good at what they did. And what they found very quickly was that they all had a basic set of skills. People who were excellent did a certain, no matter what their field was, they had a certain set of skills and ways of approaching the work that were similar. And they realized that they could teach people to be excellent in their field.
Okay.
And then one of the other questions that was asked and that they were trying to figure out was, how is it that 2 children can go through the same kind of upbringing, and one can come out empowered and able to cope with the world and really, really excel, and one can come out incredibly handicapped and, and like end up in jail or end up really angry or have, just have a much more difficult life. And what's the difference between the child that's able to thrive from that situation than one that isn't? And what they realized two things, which is they could teach the child that didn't thrive to thrive, but they could also teach the child that did thrive, how not to thrive.
Oh.
That human experience was changeable either way.
Yeah. Let's always move towards the thriving aspect of it.
But the thought that it really is about what the early programs, which is the programming in NLP Marin, or NLP, neuro-linguistic programming. The programming is the kind of the basic set of skills or belief systems that each person walks into a situation determines how they experience a situation and what they take from it.
Nice. Thank you. So for you, when you were going through your NLP journey in the very beginning, do you have any, or what were some of your memorable moments of quote unquote sucking at NLP?
Oh, you mean like being really bad?
Yeah, really, yeah.
Yeah, during my test at the core level. At the very end, we call it a festival of learning and integration, and basically we are evaluating how somebody's doing. And somewhere in the middle of my working with somebody, I realized I had no idea what was going on. And I was watching the person's mouth move, but I was not tracking it. And I just said, I have to stop right now and ask my training assistant for some help.
Yeah. I think most of us who've gone through, just for the listeners as well, I've gone through the training all the way up until a course called Hollow 1. And yeah, I feel the same way. Just like looking around like, wait, where am I? I kind of blacked out for a second.
Well, there's so many different things that you pay attention to and that we teach you to focus on in a different way that for a little while some of the conversations are hard to track because you're paying attention to such different things and trying to make sense of it. I actually, as a teacher and working with students, I sort of love those moments because they're the moments when something is expanding in the brain and they actually have too much information to be able to process it yet, but they're like right on the brink of being able to take in so much more. To me, that is it's a major moment of growth, and it's when I sort of look forward to the students getting to. I'm much less excited when the students do stuff extremely well as when they learn. And I love those moments when something happens and they get either really confused or really frustrated, and then they figure it out. And it's like that because once they can figure it out once, they'll always be able to figure it out. They've learned how to figure it out. And so those are really exciting moments. And I think, my memory of that, what I learned in that moment when I was a student, and the gentleness and the sweetness with which the TA helped me is quite memorable. She's still very precious to me in my heart for the way she handled it. She basically looked at me and said, yeah, that person just took you by the nose and ran you into the weeds. Said,
which tends to happen.
Okay, what do I do now?
Yeah.
But it was like, she was so gentle with we've seen this before.
Yeah.
Have fun kind of thing.
Yeah. So. And TAs play a huge part in it, in the whole process. And you guys do a great job with having great TAs there to support and be there for all the students, which makes the learning experience even greater than it would be just by itself.
Yeah, without the TAs, we wouldn't have the quality trainings that we have. Yeah. And what we try and do when we're picking the TAs is to pick a variety of people with a variety of personalities, with the understanding that there will always be some students who get along better with different TAs. And it's the variety of styles of feedback and of presence and of support that I think really allows each student to find their own style. Yeah. And as opposed to if you had a bunch of TAs that were all doing it the same way and we're all giving the same information and then you'd get a bunch of robots out of the class.
Yeah.
When you've got that variety of TAs who are so excited that they all love the work and they all have a slightly different style, it really gives the students some permission to have their own style. And it doesn't mean that everybody likes every TA. and we know that, and we're fine with that.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know?
It really works out. I mean, it's great stuff. And then kind of get back to the teaching where you mentioned about those aha moments. How did you actually come about being a teacher of NLP?
I think from the beginning, I kind of knew I'd found my place. And because I went immediately into being a training assistant, I was leading study groups and answering students' questions kind of from the beginning. And I did that quite intensively, actually, for about 10 years. I was doing that at a training center. There wasn't really an opportunity to do much training in those 10 years just because of the structure of the organization. But I was kind of always sneaking it in here and there. And then just when I started coming down to NLP Marin, I kind of immediately started into the curriculum development, and then would participate some up front, and then finally was up front kind of constantly. So, there's so many things in this world these days that people can learn online that they can pick up really quickly and be good at, and they read 3 or 4 books and off they go into this field. And in my experience, NLP is way more like playing a musical instrument. You can pick it up and you can play Mary Had a Little Lamb pretty easily. But to actually, be part of a symphony takes years of practice, of time, of dedication, and of a love. And for people to get to a point where they want to train, I think requires some real time kind of in the trenches, which is incredible. Like, I miss that sometimes as a trainer. I miss the study groups. I miss some of the closeness with the students that you got when you were a training assistant. It's a different experience, and it's not one to rush through, in my mind, because it is, once you move beyond being a training assistant and into trainer, it's just never quite the same. It's lovely, but it's, their experiences, like, you can't go back to kindergarten kind of thing.
Some people might, but want to, but.
So I took, and partially I didn't get into the training or actually working with clients for a while because I was so young when I started. I was, a sophomore in college. I was 19, 20 years old. I remember that as a group of students, we went out to lunch and they went into a bar and I couldn't go with them because I wasn't 21. But I just knew that I needed some life experience outside of my high school, college experience. I needed to actually go work in another job and interact with people who weren't in the NLP community for a while before I would be ready to actually teach or work with clients. So I went out and got a job in research.
Nice.
And basically did sessions with my coworkers in the cubicle.
Yeah. As you do once you learn NLP, you just start with whoever's closest to you. So noticing when you first started, you kind of mentioned this already, but did you ever think that you were going to be? So, like, as soon as you took that first course, were you just like, yeah, I'm going to be a teacher? Or like, yeah, this is...
No, initially, I really had my sights set on just working with clients.
Okay.
I enjoyed the work so much that was, I think that I was, from a young child, was sort of the counselor of my friends. So I think I was always going to aim towards some kind of one-on-one counseling.
Nice.
Even though in college I went for a computer science major to start with. I did switch to psychology, but
it always comes out at the end, right? It just will show itself.
Yeah. Well, and for me, the neurolinguistic programming is like the perfect combination of psychology and programming. People are a little more predictable than the psychology field holds them as. There is a certain amount of, you put a certain input in, you'll get a certain response from each individual, but it is way more dynamic than a computer is.
Yeah.
So understanding a little bit of computer programming has always helped me
Oh.
understand people, because NLP is working about working with the patterns and noticing the patterns that happen in a person's life or in the course of a conversation, and being able to pull that pattern out and be able to know where the pattern's working and where it's not working for them.
Yeah. And then can you just briefly talk about the differences of NLP and psychology, and or similarities that kind of link them together? Because I know they because didn't they start from a psychologist, a linguist, or two linguists or something?
They had a computer programmer and a linguist.
And a linguist, okay, that's what it was.
They did not have any psychologists. They actually were trying to toss all of psychology out. And Jonathan Rice is kind of the one that we credit with having brought the two back together.
Oh, okay.
Psychology is, how would I say it? It's more about, there's so many different fields of psychology, but a lot of it is about observing behavior and using cognitive functioning to understand the behavior, to work through. If I can give you an example. So if somebody is afraid of elevators, has just a pure phobia of an elevator, in psychology they're going to, depending on the modality, they're going to work with desensitizing the person so that they are not as afraid, so that they can overcome themselves and be able to ride the elevator. So they might, one of the forms might be that they have a conversation in the therapist's office, and then they step out into the hall and look at the elevator while they talk. And then they go back in the office, and they just get slowly closer and closer. In NLP, we're kind of going in and discovering what are the pictures, sounds, feelings, tastes, or smells. What is the brain doing to create the fear? Mm-hmm. And that's usually not a cognitive function as much as it is sort of a running a program that runs that. And so we're going in and finding that out. There's a lot of emotion in both, or there can be. There doesn't necessarily be. What I have always loved about NLP is that clients can walk away and they don't have to remember to be different. We've helped them set a pathway in their brain where they're not having to think or affirm that they're okay. They just feel okay. Mm. And where they are consciously aware of what we're doing the whole time. So unlike hypnosis, where you might put somebody in a trance and then give them a bunch of suggestions, in NLP they are helping select the suggestions that are given to the mind.
Oh, excellent. Thank you.
So I always liked it because it empowered the client so much. And I like the idea of, as a client, not having to remember that I was okay, but just feeling okay on the inside.
Yeah, that's a great part of it.
So I was like, I really, when I first started into any kind of therapy, I just wanted to be hypnotized and made better.
Yeah.
So now I love conventional therapy for some clients, because if somebody hasn't had the chance to ever be heard, to ever be witnessed, to ever be even asked questions about their situation, they've not learned how to talk about it, and they don't have a way to talk about it internally or externally. And so it's hard for them to imagine a better life. And conventional therapy gives people an opportunity and the ability to be able to talk about, to be witnessed, to have the experience of saying something about themselves and not having somebody go, oh, which some people have never had, or being yelled at for it. And that does open up a space in people. So there's a use in this world for all of these. Some people in NLP and some people in psychology try and throw one or the other out. And I will occasionally, when I work with somebody, I'll refer them to a regular therapist, because they just haven't. The thing that they're aching for is to be heard. So there's a balance here in terms of like knowing what is useful for someone when you work with them. Yeah. Yeah. Do they need to go to a doctor and get medication? Do they need to go to a therapist and talk? Do they, need a friend who will take them for a walk, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good. Thank you. Thank you for letting us know about
I'm not
that.
sure that quite answers what's the difference between the two, but
But I think a lot of people, like you said, it's one or the other, right? It's either psychology or it's like NLP, and you're like, I don't have the viewpoint of those. I think like why not everything, like mix of everything. That's what I kind of feel like NLP Marin brings is a wide variety of different things that kind of differentiates it from other types of NLP, and we'll get into that a little bit
and I,
later
I
here.
actually have some clients who work with a regular therapist, and then when they kind of come up with something that they really want changed, they come in and work with me.
Oh wow,
Um,
yeah,
and that seems to work really well. I also will sometimes recommend that if somebody's trying to work through an addiction or deal with somebody who's addicted, um, sending them off to the 12-step programs with the filter of go and listen for your story and notice what it triggers in you, and then bring whatever's triggered back here and we'll work with it.
oh yeah, oh that's
Um,
good, yeah,
but a lot of times if people are dealing with those kinds of issues, being around people who are dealing with the same issue can be incredibly helpful.
yeah, wow,
It's like people they start to hear the patterns and go, oh, that's part of the addiction. Oh, I get it. Okay. And
yeah,
then they come and sit down with me and we work through what is it that they, what they want.
yeah,
Given this, what do you want?
yeah. Love that
So
question.
I love having the ability to send people off to all sorts of other resources should they need them.
Yeah,
Um, and especially if somebody just needs to be listened to these days, a lot of health insurance covers 8 to 10 therapy sessions, and it's like, okay, so you can pay a $20 copay
yeah,
and go be heard, or you can pay, a lot more and sit with me and I'll listen to you. But one, that's not my favorite thing to do, and two, it's really expensive for you to do that.
If you could give the younger Carla, who is just starting to learn NLP, any words of wisdom now, what would they be?
Huh. The one that comes to me most is it's a little bit more trust in her ability, but there was such a learning in learning to trust myself that it's like telling her that feels like it robs her of something
Mm,
that was hard won.
yeah,
So maybe the main thing would just be keep going, because there's this thing with NLP that you start to learn that when you understand how different experiences have shaped who you are, you don't have this list of things that you want to make different about the way you did it.
mm,
Everything you did, every decision you made, you were doing the best you could, and it has made you who you are today.